June 6th, 2019. I'm John Travis in Novato, California, and stuffing his face there in Madison, Wisconsin is the illustrious Donald Bruce Ardell. So say hi to the folks.
Hi, folks.
Catch you eating. Today we're going to make history by talking about history, in that we were both key figures back in the 70s when you had to spell wellness, and we bumped into each other in about August of '75 at
Very possibly. I know it was at one evening at a holistic health and nutrition center called WHN.
It was either August or September is my guess. I had just moved to California in July, having finished 6 years of the public health service, and had dreamed of opening a wellness center, a little hole in the wall, basically, in a complex of other psychological offices, with me and a part-time biofeedback practitioner. And meeting you changed all that, plunged me into a level of public awareness that an introvert, shy nerd like me was pretty unprepared for. Thank heavens your extroverted showmanship helped make up for that. You went around the world spouting about wellness, getting your PhD in wellness. And well, let's start with, even before we met, what's the first time you ever encountered the word wellness?
It was while I was teaching with a distinguished public health physician professor named Heinrich Blum at the University of California at Berkeley.
Right.
I was just a part-time lecturer that Heinrich brought in to speak on health planning, because at the time I was the executive director of the Bay Area Health Planning Council, which had responsibilities for the entire Bay Area of San Francisco regional network. And the health planning operation at the time was funded by the Great Society programs under Lyndon Johnson. And it provided for regional councils to be established that would be primarily run by citizen members, called consumers at the time, versus provider members. The consumers, therefore, would make, according to the theory, unbiased judgments about the best allocation of resources for medical facilities as well as manpower allocation.
The consumers would do that, or the providers?
No, well, the consumers had a majority on the 30-member councils.
Oh, okay. Those consumers.
That was the theory. And the theory was that we would be able to make recommendations on certificates of need for added beds for hospitals, the hospitals that wanted added wings and so forth, and prevent duplication of services. So we were grand coordinators, and we were to make more rational the medical system in our regions and prevent duplication, and thereby constrain the rising medical costs, which at that time, of course, were a pittance of what they are today.
But they were climbing at a similar rate, and we had no idea that it would continue.
Yeah. A big problem with
that work.
It didn't work at all, but it took 3 years to find out that it wasn't working, and it was disbanded. But it was a great way to make a living, great way to learn about the medical system, and an extraordinary growth opportunity for me. Great deal of controversy during all these periods when the councils were meeting, and there were serious controversies associated with any given institution that came before us, which could see no reason whatsoever why they shouldn't be able to do whatever it was they wanted to do. And we had no power whatsoever of a regulatory or other nature, and we had no economic leverage. So we couldn't, like today's entrepreneurs, build whatever we wanted to because we had the finances to pay for it. In our case, we didn't have finances, nor did we have any power to stop them from doing what we recommended they shouldn't do. So anyway, I was not ennobled by this form of health planning. At the time, I was the editor of the journal, the American Journal of Health Planning. I was working part-time with a business consulting firm and accounting firm that also did health consulting, Arthur Young and Company. And what else was I doing? Well, getting back to meeting you, I was beginning to become disillusioned with the whole idea of health planning and very much excited with something that was also in the legislation, but was totally ignored and not promoted by the administrators, the bureaucrats in Bethesda who were in charge of these programs. And that was doing that which might improve health status of the population. And of course, the only thing I ever encountered that could do that up until that time was the concept of wellness, which I heard about, to get to your question, from Heinrich Blum. He mentioned the term because he personally knew the person we've come to promote as the father of the wellness concept, a physician named Ardell Dunn, whose book High Level Wellness was the only book that was written up to that time that was basically a series of lectures he gave at a Unitarian Universalist church in Bethesda, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. So anyway,
he lived in Bethesda, but he used the Arlington Church.
Arlington Church.
And had it on the radio.
That's correct.
Now, so Blum gave you a copy or got you a copy of?
He handed me a copy of a little booklet, Ardell Dunn's booklet. And I read it and was much inspired by it, excited by it. And it led me to recognize that I didn't want to be a health planner anymore. And so I enrolled in a PhD program at the business school at Stanford University. I was able to do that because I had just a few months earlier, before I moved from being director of the health board of the Metropolitan Council in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, to San Francisco, from one job to another in the health planning field. I moved in 72, and all this that we're talking about now was happening in 75. And so I had 3 months of scholarship, essentially, to attend Harvard or Stanford or any school I wanted to attend, and I chose the business school, and I used that as my jumping off point towards the doctoral work that I would later finish in Cincinnati at the Union Institute and University with you and others, other wellness experts. There were few and far between at that time. Like, remember Dr. Kaiser at University of Colorado?
Lee Kaiser, yeah. And
then Kaiser. So I had pretty terrific faculty, as well as some faculty members from Stanford, and one from Stanford and the others from the Union School.
And was it you that introduced me to Don Fink?
I met him in the same place I met you. He was one of the leaders at the Holistic Health and Nutrition Network.
Oh, that? Oh.
Mill Valley.
It must have been Rich Shamus, known as
That
Shane.
might have been Rich Shamus.
Yeah.
Who did you mention? Rich.
He was called his name is Shames, and we called him Shames then, but he changed it to Shamus later.
I remember that.
So we met that fateful night, and you were the
fateful night
person I met that had read Dunn's book. It was like, what? So that was our instant bond.
Right.
And I was must have been doing an early version of my 2-projector slideshow that
you had 2 projectors that night.
Yeah, I had yet to get a lap dissolve unit, and we must have exchanged phone numbers afterwards and bits. And
we did more than that. I called you the next day and got myself over to visit you at the Wellness Center.
Well, actually, I don't think it was open yet, because I was using that little office at 295 Miller that I was renting.
I remember that.
We didn't get into the building until November, the same month that Dunn died.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you wrote up the Prevention magazine article before the center opened, so it was based on my projection more than
I've
reality.
forgotten now. They all blended together in my mind.
Yeah, and then we encountered Dervika Spino. I think probably that was your doing also, or was it
Yeah,
Richard Miles? I was thinking Richard Miles.
she was the dynamo.
Yeah, yeah. So what were our first antics? Like, I remember you printed up a card using a very crude illness wellness continuum.
That's right.
I had met this alcoholic old printer guy. He was really into AA there on Miller Avenue.
Right.
Who he had a letterpress printer, and he printed cards up for me, and you did the same thing.
Right.
So we had matching primitive versions of the illness wellness continuum. And then you went off and started spouting off everywhere about wellness.
It was amazing. The timing was remarkable because I was still associated with the health planning field, and being editor of the magazine, of the journal rather, health planning journal. I was able to write stories about wellness in this journal. And those stories, plus my contacts with the health planning people, who also were sick to death of the regulatory nightmare, of the controversial and ineffective nature of health planning in the regional planning councils, were inviting me to come in and talk about wellness in their metropolitan areas all over the country. So even though I didn't have a book, I didn't have any kind of established reputation at that point, during those first months after meeting with you, I was talking about making connections between the wellness concept and the work that we could do as health planners.
And wasn't there a big sea change with the HSAs coming in? And
no, that was to come about a year later. That was a sea change in the making. There was talk about that, and there was a struggle more to keep the old health planning agencies alive than it was to welcome in the new HSAs.
Which was health systems, what? What was the A?
HSAs, health systems agencies.
Agencies, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I remember you did some big gig in Florida, and you took 1,000 wellness inventories, and I'd only sold 50 of them at that point.
Yeah, but you were a keynote speaker. I got you in as a keynote speaker in Miami.
Really?
At that conference. That was the annual conference of the Health Planning Association.
I don't remember ever.
Kent Ballard was the executive director of that organization, and he was one of my best friends. And I had all kinds of connections with Kent in terms of playing tennis together and all the rest. And Kent would bring anybody in that I recommended, and we brought you to Miami, and you gave a keynote about wellness.
I completely blocked that one out.
Well, there are pictures of that. That was a big step. And of course, I also featured you in the journal. And you wrote a piece, I believe, as did Donald Fink, Heinrich Blum, and others with whom I was connecting at the time. And I have those journals if you want to remember.
I'd love to see them. I'd get a copy and put it on the website, because I don't remember that at all.
How about that?
So I was struggling with the finances of, my brother helped me sandblast the paint off the Doug Fir siding in the 42 Miller building. And, it was way behind. It was supposed to have been ready in July, and we didn't move in until November. And then I had no clue how I was going to run an office. I had a part-time secretary and part-time biofeedback practitioner. And you were off doing all this stuff, and I was suddenly getting, it was your Prevention magazine article.
Right.
That flooded us with 1,000 letters, mainly from nurses saying, how could I get my doctor to understand this?
I still meet nurses who talk to me about how the Prevention article and the book, which came out shortly thereafter in '77, High Level Wellness and Alternative to Doctors' Drugs and Disease, got them started on a career track.
Yeah, and my dad, a general practitioner in Ohio, who'd never heard of Prevention magazine, found out that a lot of his patients subscribed to it, and they were bringing it in and showing it to him.
And he probably wasn't, well, if he was like most doctors, he wouldn't have been too happy about it because it was very much into
He didn't know enough
questionable
about it to
practices.
even know.
Yeah. I mean, it was really holistic at the time.
Yeah, yeah. And then you also introduced me to Everett Loomis.
Yeah, I was just reading about him this morning in Wikipedia. He died in 1991. Did you know that?
It said 2001. I was
2001.
reading it there too. How did we, that is synchronicity. I woke up thinking, I wonder if what year, because I was a founding member of the American Holistic Medical Association. So I looked that up in Wikipedia, and it turned out it was in the entrance for Everett's. And I read the whole thing.
Huh.
And I videoed him along with Jim Strohecker. About 6 months before he died, I got this incredible interview there at his house.
Yeah.
And the Australian customs people apparently confiscated the video, and I lost it.
Oh,
She asked me for it after he died, and I'm to this day.
well, when I was writing High Level Wellness, I went down to Hemet and spent an evening and good part of a morning interviewing in Meadowlark. And,
Yeah. Well, that is weird that you read it and I read it at the same time this morning with no connection.
there was something I wanted to learn in preparation for our chat this morning about Everett Loomis, because I was also with him in someplace in the Midwest. I'll think of it in a moment, but there was an honorable banquet, and they brought people who knew this individual in. It wasn't Loomis, but Loomis was there. This was a person who created a center in the, I wish I could think of his name, but anyway.
Norm Shealy?
No. Norm Shealy was there also, by the way, at that banquet. But it was to honor this person. No, I'm embarrassed. I don't remember his name. I'll find it.
You know, the frustrating thing is that wellness was arising at the same time as holistic health, which then became complementary medicine and complementary alternative medicine, and then integrated health or integrated medicine, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And they really are very different things.
Extraordinarily different. As a matter of fact, in many of my lectures, the first thing I had to do was reassure doctors who came loaded for bear to go after me, thinking I was coming down to talk about an alternative cancer treatment, like involving apricots and posterior insertions, and it was just crazy stuff. And they were greatly reassured when I gave them a quick overview of the nature of the wellness concept that did not involve medicine at all.
Well, somebody inserted in my Wikipedia page that wellness is a branch of alternative medicine. It drives me nuts, and I'm not allowed to edit it.
Oh.
And I had a guy I actually paid to clean it up at one point, and they gave me a lot of flack because he knew me, but it was so inaccurate. And now somebody's done this. The guy is no longer doing it, and I can't fix it. And it's diametrically opposed to the illness wellness continuum later down on that page.
Well, there you go. You let your own legacy get out of hand.
The difference between the treatment paradigm, which is fixing things, and the wellness paradigm, which is growing and learning and thriving. Well, back up a little more again to how you got into this. You grew up on the East Coast, right? I've forgotten where. Philadelphia, and then you wound up in DC at Georgetown or George Washington?
George Washington.
George Washington. And you were a big jock there in basketball, and you know the quintessential man about campus. And then you got, well, let's see, I'm not sure what the sequence was. You had 2 kids when I met you, and you had just divorced, like all of us. I had just divorced. Bill Hetler just divorced.
Yes.
And Halbert Dunn, we found out, had left his wife, all 4 of us. And what
I didn't leave my wife, by the way.
Oh, really? She
We
left
parted
you? Or?
amicably and we took about 5 years to do so. We were together in marital way for 10 years. She was my college sweetheart. We're still very best friends. We visit 2 or 3 times a year. They're out in California with my children. She's out in California with my children and grandchildren.
She lives right across the road from me, actually.
Exactly. She lives closer to you. Yeah. Very close to you.
Yeah.
Anyway, I had been newly separated in that I bought a separate condo, just a trial basis for 1 year we were going to do.
Oh, okay.
It ended up spreading out to 3 or 4, maybe 5 years of living in different condos close by and working cooperatively with the children and with each other. We didn't have any disputes, really. We just wanted to go different ways.
Right. Yeah, that's admirable. So then you were married when you came to California. Or no, you went to Wisconsin.
No, that's true. We moved to Corte Madera and stayed there. We were together for a year there in Corte Madera.
And then you were actually in Minneapolis before that for.
Yes, with the Metropolitan Council in St. Paul, Minnesota.
In St. Paul, right. That's right. You told me all about the cathedral and stuff that I went to see when I was there a couple of years ago. That famous avenue with all the mansions on it that you didn't live in.
Summit Avenue.
Right. So here we are in California now. Did you find you had to spell wellness to people?
No, not really.
We did on the phone. We answered Wellness Resource Center and WELLNESS.
No, I didn't find that to be a problem. Or maybe I didn't pay attention. I didn't care how they spelled it.
Well, I mean, people didn't come up to you and say, what?
No, I didn't get that.
Uh-huh. So I'm just thinking historically then, you published the article in Prevention, and then you were doing all of this travel. Oh, then you wrote your thesis. And
That's correct. And you were a part of that along with 5 other people. And I would send you reports on a monthly basis on what I was doing. And my thesis eventually became
high-level wellness.
A manuscript for high-level wellness.
How did you make the connection? You knew Mark Bricklin, apparently.
He was the editor. He was the big chief there, managing editor at Prevention.
But how did you make that connection? How did you get in there?
I was working with Carol somebody, one of his associate editors, and they invited me to come to Emmaus, Pennsylvania, and spend a couple of days there. And I met with Mr. Ardell, who later was killed in an auto accident in Russia. But like his father, he was a big enthusiast for holistic health and for the magazine, and was the driving force there for quite a while before his tragic accident. Anyway, while I was there, we talked about wellness, and they asked if I had anything else going besides these couple articles I wrote. I wrote something else that wasn't about wellness for Prevention. And I was working on this manuscript as part of my PhD dissertation. I told them about that, and they offered me a contract. That was it.
Amazing, yeah.
Just in the right place at a good time.
And you were citing My Center, Esalen.
Yes.
And there was another 1 or 2 places.
Well, there was Hemet,
right.
Meadowlark.
Yeah.
And there was the Holistic Health and Nutrition Institute. And
WHN.
A couple others that if I had to do over again, of course, I wouldn't mention at all.
Well,
I looked over that book, and by the way, 80 or 85% of it's still solid stuff. It's stood the test of time.
Yeah, because it got republished by 10 Speed, then in
2 different publishers, Bantam Books and 10 Speed.
Yeah.
The 10 Speed was a 10-year anniversary edition, and I got to take out the things I didn't agree with and put in the new stuff.
Is it still in print? Is 10 Speed out on their backlist?
No, it's not. Well, you can always Google it and buy it for $5 or something like that.
Yeah. like Dunn's book. At one point, you could get one for $3 or $4, and now they're rare and they're going for a couple $100.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're rarely even up on Amazon.
Remarkable. Wow.
I keep mine carefully wrapped in parchment and the Gospel according to Halbert.
A holy book.
And then you went
Secular holy book.
I still regret greatly that I lived in Columbia, Maryland, 20 miles away from Bethesda, where he lived, when I discovered his book. And I never thought it would amount to anything. I thought wellness was a stupid word, and I loved the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual aspects that he wove into the book, but I thought wellness. When I put up my sign, I had 2 separate signs, one with my name and preventive medicine, as far away as the Wellness Resource Center, so I could dump it and not be associated.
Goodness, how about that? You knew, didn't you, that I went to...
And then you went, yeah, well...
Visited with Phelpsy, his wife.
Right.
Got a tour of the home.
Yeah, and then you got the binder with all of his...
Got all
put together.
A closet full of his articles, bound in big book manuscripts.
And then you gave it to me when you moved to Florida.
I moved to Florida.
And I put it in storage while I was in Costa Rica. And I dug it out like 10 or 15 years later and discovered that there were 3 eulogies in the back of it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them mentioned his children, his boys.
Oh my goodness.
I thought, what? Because I knew he and Phelpsy didn't have any kids.
Mm-hmm.
Then's when I found out that, well, actually, a friend of mine who does genealogic research tracked down his granddaughter, and I got a phone number, talked to her. She connected me with her mother, who was the middle son's wife. His 3 sons, the last one had just died, and they were pretty famous. One of them he was an astronomer, and they named a whole observatory for him.
Wow.
The other one was the chief architect for 3M and designed most of their buildings. And the oldest one actually was very reclusive, pretty wounded, I think, by their father leaving. But he had published a lot of books and died young. Anyway, I interviewed his daughter-in-law for an hour. And before she died, she was in Minneapolis, and learned a lot about him. Plus, I got these pictures of him as a young man. And it was fascinating to learn all of this, thanks to your having met Phelpsy and obtained that binder that I still...
How about that? Well, that was an admirable bit of a wellness-based investigative journalism on your part, for which you should be feted someday. Honored and esteemed.
Well, I'm going to scan it and put it all online in the website. So I'm collecting all this stuff and interviewing us old codgers for the website. It's going to be interviews like this and all the resources I can track down and put it all in one place, and hope that someday somebody will come back and appreciate knowing all of this.
You never know. Recently, I made my first visit to a small town in Peoria, Illinois, and went to a park where in the center of the park there is a statue of one of my other heroes, namely Ardell, Robert Greene Ingersoll. And it was placed there in something like 1909. And surviving family was there, and pictures are available. But it was now over 100 years had gone by, and the statue had eroded, and it looked pretty shaky. And it had recently been a fundraising effort enabled the refurbishing of that statue. So it was carted off to a foundry in Philadelphia and brought back in a big ceremony for the new, improved, repolished, and spectacular Robert Greene Ingersoll statue. So you might consider that the good news is there'll probably be a statue of you someday, but the bad news is if they don't keep it up, you're not going to look so good.
Well, getting back to our early sordid days and our antics, The character the third of our triumvirate. Well, actually, we were a quadrumvirate until Bob Allen checked out early on us. But let's talk about Bill Hetler. And how did you meet Bill Hetler?
Bill called me after High Level Wellness was published and invited me to Stevens Point in the winter.
Oh, okay.
To speak at his, he was the head of the Student Health Service, so to speak to students as well as to meet with members of his community, adult community, the working people who were at that time planning to run conferences that would be broadened from the little meetings they had initially to talk about the wellness concept. And that would later become, those meetings in July every year would become they would have different names over the first 10 or 15 years, but eventually became the National Wellness Institute. So anyway, and then I went back every summer for the next several decades and participated in the week-long wellness conferences that were sponsored by Bill Hetler, really, and his two associates, Fred Liefkin and Dennis Elsenrath. They were three primary movers. And then there were a couple others who were very close behind in terms of being intimate parts of the planning and the direction of the National Wellness Institute.
Yeah, well, bringing Elaine Sullivan in was a wise move because the three men had gotten very masculinated. But yeah, Bill he actually had sent one of his people out to one of our workshops, and she brought back a wellness workbook in the old 3-ring binder before it was published. And I ran into him at a Society for Prospective Medicine meeting in San Francisco, I think before that happened, because I'd known Louis Robbins, the founder of that, and had programmed his health risk appraisal. It was called the health hazard appraisal in those days,
right,
for the Public Health Service. So we had that in common, and then we discovered we had wellness in common. So the three of us were constantly interacting there at the conferences. They were wonderful at the Stevens Point campus. It was like summer camp with
it was
1,000 adults, and really sad the way that has deteriorated into a regular old hotel type conference now instead of the fun and games that it was. And I'll be putting up pictures of some of our antics there.
It's become very much a workplace focused institutional program with the emphasis on cutting costs.
And Bill and Denny and what's his name? Fred have all backed off it. And
oh yeah, Bill's not to be seen anymore.
Meeting Elaine there was a major breakthrough for me too. I remember her standing in front of 1,000 of us in the Century Life Insurance Auditorium when we were going up there for the keynotes.
Yeah, right.
And she had 1,000 people crying. I thought, oh, this woman, I got to meet this woman. I'm going to interview her on Tuesday too. But she really, and she'd had some connection with Stevens Point. And she taught there, and she knew Ann with the A last name. Abbott, yes, Ann Abbott. So I'll be interviewing both of them too with their memories of these early days. And I've got some background noise here. The neighbor just started their car, but they'll be gone in a minute. So these conferences, who else can you think of that was an early inspiration? There was a woman from Canada, physician. What was her name? She's disappeared, but she had a really friendly face, and I loved it because she'd be sitting in my audience smiling when I gave talks. I'll think of her in a minute. I
can picture her, but I can't summon the name.
Yeah. Our senior moments.
No, I was like this when I was 21. No changes really. I can go on for hours with Robert Ingersoll speeches, so I know I'm still functioning.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Well, I
at
know
some time in the future, that's probably all I'll be able to remember, but at least I'll have something going for me.
there's a whole other area that I want to talk about of your life is you're becoming a jock. And I remember you asked me to run with you in that first, what was a 10K in Carta Madeira, Larkspur, somewhere.
No, it was the
Uh,
Pacific Sun 10K.
yeah.
It
So
might have been in Corte Madera it started at the field in Larkspur, actually, a College of Marin,
Yeah.
track and field.
And I ran, what, about a kilometer with you before I gave up. And
Well, you weren't training. I'm sure you could have been a very good runner if you wanted to.
yeah, well, I did go out for track my sophomore year in high school, and I was as big a failure in that as I was in basketball.
I remember swimming with you and somebody else in the Russian River. Do you remember that? Or maybe you were in a canoe, but we were definitely out there in the Russian River going, fortunately, with the tide.
I don't remember that. Was it in Guerneville?
Yeah, Gurneyville. It was many years later.
Yeah, yeah. So then you went on to be doing triathlons and Ironman, and that's been a huge part of your life. And I've only, in the last 5 years, actually been able to do any kind of exercise program. My 12-minute HIIT.
Well,
But I
that's
can
not
do it.
completely true. I mean, just a few weeks ago, you and I went for bike rides.
But I mean, serious kind of cardiovascular, which I do with HIIT.
Yeah.
And that's, meeting Yvonne 8 years ago and getting into mountain biking with her.
Well,
I had a lot to do with that.
I should say something about this because running in general, in different road races, not just in Marin, but elsewhere, and then later, beginning about 1983, becoming a triathlete when I moved to Orlando, Florida in '84, and had played nicely or fit well with the promotion of wellness lifestyles. And it was a good idea to give people the impression when they first met me that I was consistent in following the message by looking healthy and being able to demonstrate some level of vitality by virtue of being successful and even participating in triathlons, which could be quite demanding and required a disciplined lifestyle to do well with.
Now, have you ever run a marathon?
I ran 11 of them. My best was 2:38, which was the Oakland Marathon in 1982. But I ran about 5 of them at 2:40, 2 hours and 40 minutes, which is a 6-minute per mile pace for 26 miles.
Wow.
Today, I can't run a single mile in 6 minutes. But then again, I'm 81 now.
Yeah. Well, now, what's the fastest anyone's ever run a marathon for comparison?
2 hours and 1 minute and some seconds. I've got that in my book, my new book. That's one of the tips is to recognize you have to live a disciplined lifestyle. And Emil Kipchoge in Berlin Marathon just last September, I believe, broke the world record by like a minute and a half. It was the most astonishing thing.
Wow.
The big goal now, when we were kids in high school, it used to be the 4-minute mile was the big standard.
Right.
Now the equivalent of that. The equivalent of that is the sub 2 hour marathon.
Yeah, I can see
that. Hasn't been done yet, but nobody's come as close as Kipchoge.
Well, another aspect back to Hitler was our Frost Valley adventures, which my 47-year-old daughter actually remembered that and brought it up the other night when I was visiting my granddaughters. Yes. I didn't remember that I'd taken her there, but Jeannie and John were there too, weren't they?
I brought Jeannie and John along, yes, indeed. And I brought many people there by recommending them to Bill Hitler, yourself included.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. That was great. And that took place at different times of year. Sometimes we go in the winter and sometimes in the summer.
Yeah, I
I
was
went,
only there one summer, I think it was.
oh, I went a couple winters, and one time I got snowed in.
Whoa. So
Yeah,
they were doing wellness for, this was a YMCA
yeah.
summer
Oh,
camp.
the leader of the Frost Valley YMCA was Halby, Halby, oh, I forget his last name.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Halby.
Yeah,
Bill Hetler will be able to tell you all about this part of
yeah.
the wellness history. But that was a lovely experience, and we worked with kids and got them excited about the idea. We made a lot of mistakes taking away their sugar. It wasn't such a good idea.
What happened? Did they rebel?
Oh yeah, they used to sneak into the canteen, which is they had and buy all kinds of junk that they didn't get at dinner time.
Because that reminds me of the conference we did up at Ralston White with your health planners.
Yeah,
And we were feeding them vegetarian dinners,
yeah.
and they rebelled and went down to McDonald's.
Right. Remember my PhD ceremony graduation when I brought in a cook who was a specialist in some kind of probiotics or whatever at the time, and you were not so impressed with him. You thought he was a bit of a quack, which he probably was.
Well, I used to go
It
to
was
his
at
house.
Shelter
He had
Ridge.
meals.
It was at Shelter Ridge, where I lived, the condo where I lived.
Yeah, well, he lived over in Tam Junction,
Yeah.
and he used to have dinners at his house, and it
Oh, yeah.
introduced me
That's
to,
how.
I can't remember his name either, but Shamus will probably remember it. But the main thing is he was into food combining, and that was too much for me.
That was it. That's what didn't. Yeah, you were skeptical, which is a good thing. In fact, that's something we didn't emphasize enough: is skepticism and the importance of having some evidentiary base for that which you're promoting. I mean, we knew that, but we didn't emphasize that enough, or there wouldn't have been as much holistic health that crept into some of the associations that we had.
Well, let's talk about the common major disappointment in our professional lives of the bastardization of the word wellness and how that happened. Dan Rather opened his 60 Minutes piece saying wellness. Now there's a word you don't hear every day.
I know, I remember that. Yes.
But as a result of him,
yeah.
And he
now we hear it every day in the wrong context and with the wrong.
Exactly. And there were 1,000 hospital wellness centers thanks to you at one point.
Oh yeah. But again, they gave wellness their own interpretations, which is what happened at the corporate level.
Yeah.
And medicine became an important part of it. And almost every case, the director who would be appointed to wellness programs was a physician, and not necessarily. What?
The kiss of death.
Well, yeah, they were looking for legitimacy. I mean, if you want to have it running a health program, you'll get sued if you don't have it led by a doctor. Must have been their thinking, a physician, that is. And these doctors, for the most part, were not really immersed, interested, or even informed about the genuine nature of the wellness concept as it was promoted by Ardell. In fact, I've never heard of Dunn in many cases. And they ran, at best, corporate fitness programs, and at worst, medical risk prevention, medical treatment efforts that focused on saving money for the company. Yeah.
And they eventually died out because I think they probably didn't save that much money, or.
No, actually, corporate wellness is flourishing. It's not the kind of wellness that you might recognize, but the programs, almost every big company has wellness programs.
I'm thinking of the hospital ones.
Oh, the hospitals. I think they too still have offerings, at least for their employees, which again amount to a gym, not the educational component that was your emphasis.
One in particular stands out, the French hospital guy. I'm trying to think of his name, but he was a really sweet man.
French hospital?
In a Swedish hospital, sorry.
Oh, Swedish. Oh, yes.
Denver.
Yes.
Who was that guy?
He was, I remember that. The Swedish hospital was one of the leaders. You could ask David Randall, because he worked.
Right. Yeah.
but I don't remember the fellow's name. But you're right. There was somebody who was quite, there were quite a few doctors who we worked with who I thought were pretty impressive.
Well, he got it. And I remember he came out to my center once, and I was putting dots on airplanes as a game to see if I was ever on the same airplane. And he actually got on a plane that had one of my dots on it.
No kidding. Oh my.
Told me about it, yeah.
I forgot you used to do that. You had some funny practices, didn't you? Today, you might be looked upon as some kind of suspicious character putting dots on airplanes. You could be marking planes for, some evildoers.
Well, those are the good old days. So, and another chapter in your life, though, was the move to Orlando and your operations there. You want to say some more about that?
Yeah, a physician named John Langdon, with whom
Good guy. Oh, I liked him.
Yeah, he had brought me into North Dakota or South Dakota a couple of times, and we met at the Wellness Center, and we had a nice relationship going. And I got a call from somebody on the faculty who was heading a recruiting program for the University of Central Florida for their health service. And I had just returned from a visit to South Dakota, brought in by John Langdon. And of course, I made a big case for him because he told me at the time he was going through a midlife crisis and he was looking for new directions. Oh. And so I recommended Langdon. They got in touch with him, and he agreed to come, but he called me and said, I'll accept this if you'll agree to come for 1 year and set up a wellness center, which I did. And I stayed a second year and a third year, and then they couldn't pay me anymore. And I stayed anyway, using it as an office, thinking I'd move back to California any day now. And I actually ended up staying 12 years. It was a base. It was a base from which I was able to produce the Ardell Wellness Report. And I had all kinds of secretarial services. I enjoyed giving mini lectures to the students, to guiding the efforts of the design of the Wellness Center. And I've got a few books out of it, including High Level, with one co-written with John Langdon called something like Wellness, Body, Mind, and Spirit. I think that was it, because those were the themes of the Wellness Center at UCF. It's still going. It's much more elaborate now in a nice building. We were in a dental office.
I remember being there once.
Yeah, I remember you being there. You were with someone else. A physician, maybe. I think you were with a doctor when you came to visit. Maybe you came more than once.
I think it was only once. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Don't remember. Oh, I met up with a doctor down there on that trip, and I might have brought him.
You brought him along.
Forgot all about him. Yeah, he was a real wild, out there guy. He was using ketamine back when it was.
Yeah. Well, you were doing.
Good.
You were doing some kind of. What's the equivalent when veterans come back and they need to, be reintegrated in society due to burnout and trauma?
PTSD sufferers.
Yeah. He was sort of suffering from PTSD or whatever of a medical nature.
Yeah, well, he had gotten so far out of the mainstream, and he was getting a lot of flack for it. I've forgotten all about him. Well, back to John Langdon. Is he still around? Do you have any contact?
Yes, he works for a hospital, some kind of medical director for one of the local hospitals, the Orlando Regional Medical Center. I think that's where he was last time I had contact with him, which has been several years.
So he's about our age or your age, or what?
More your age, really. It's about 5 years younger than me, I think.
And now it always amazes me that you haven't left Florida, except now you're coming to Madison in the summers. But what's the attraction to Florida besides Carol?
Well, Carol and I can go wherever we want, which is why we spend summers in Madison. But Florida Florida has a lot to offer. The weather in the wintertime is lovely,
Uh-huh.
very attractive bicycle trails. It's a terrific community for the kind of lifestyle we lead in terms of doing triathlons and running races. Cost of living is very low. You get a lot of house for the same money that we spend at most other places.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the small town in which we live is just very suited to our tastes. It's called Gulfport. It's just it's a little bit northwest, 7 or 8 miles from downtown St. Petersburg. So it's very close to where we lived for 10 years.
So you're not overrun with tourists in the winter from the north?
We're not in Gulfport. St. Petersburg is.
Uh-huh. So they're
But I didn't feel overrun. I mean, it's not unpleasant. St. Petersburg is a terrific place to live as well.
Well, I'm a great fan of Travis McGee, and even though his books were written in the 80s, he's talking about the miserable tourists that make life so sad.
Well, yeah. It used to
I
be.
have a jaded picture of Florida.
It was a different kind of Florida in that era. Now it's a very dynamic tourist area.
Well, let's see if there are any other archaic chapters in our history here of other people. We mentioned Don Fink. I don't remember what your connection with him. You said he was on the adjunct faculty also?
He was, yes. Yes. And,
I think he died a few years ago.
Really?
Yeah, I really sweet guy. I never really kept up with him when I moved to Costa Rica and then to the East Coast and then Australia. But he was the man he was one of the first doctors I met that had a heart.
There are other people who we should mention who didn't live in America who are enthusiasts for wellness. And none more so than Grant Donovan in Perth, Australia, who ran his own wellness centers, brought in many of us. I think you and I were among the earliest pioneers to go to Australia and participate in their Australian wellness institutes or conferences. And Bob Fellows and I, Bob should be mentioned as well, who combined magic and critical thinking in his work. And then he branched off and took his background in some kind of theology that he got at Yale and became a minister.
Yeah, I've been to
I'm sure he still does magic tricks from the altar, but Bob and I in 1986 were invited by Grant Donovan to come to Australia and tour for a couple weeks on the Magic of Wellness tour. And we went to 5 different cities. And in every city, we made multiple media appearances, gave lectures, and met with community leaders. And 2 years later, Grant did it again, and you came in the next time. And in fact, I think I met you during the first visit because you were already there.
Yeah.
I think it was Melbourne. We met you in Melbourne.
I thought it was Brisbane for some reason.
Oh, it might have been Brisbane. I think you're right.
Makes more sense, Melbourne.
Yeah. I've seen pictures of us at the swimming pool in Brisbane. Yeah. So besides that, then there was Deb Connors. She wasn't Connors then, but Deborah Jones. Deb Jones, and now Deb Connors in Vancouver, who adopted and was very much taken by the wellness concept. She was working at the Vancouver Hospital and Medical Center and created programs there and was an undisputed leader in the Canadian promotion of wellness. And there was somebody on the East Coast, more than just somebody, there were several on the East Coast.
Oh, there's Love Metcalf and Campbell's, right? And she did that big conference where I met Elaine up in...
oh, yeah. There was Richard Keeler. I don't know if you remember Richard Keeler.
I remember the name, yeah.
He's a very athletic guy. He used to play football for the Rams, and he was also executive director of the President's Council on Fitness and Sports. Dynamic guy. He was also one of the leaders in the Healthy America Fitness Leaders program, which was somewhat sponsored by, well, very much sponsored by Allstate Insurance as well as blessed by the President's Council on Fitness and Sports and the U.S. Junior Chamber of Commerce.
And what's that organization that's still around out in the middle Midwest somewhere that has
WellCOA.
WellCOA, yeah. It always sounds like Alcoa. I
Yeah.
picture aluminum siding.
Well, actually, Alcoa brought me to Spokane a couple times for lectures. So they were, but that was not the same as WellCOA.
Yeah, tell me about, I never had any real connection with WellCOA, but I thought you did.
Well, only in the sense that I knew the leaders and they set up councils. That was their business model, was to set up councils throughout the Midwest and maybe other places as well as time went on. And they're still going.
Who was the guy that started it?
Oh, I don't remember. They've had so many leaders over times. I'm sure I recognize the name.
I was associating it with one guy who must have been early on.
I don't. Probably one person deserves a lot of the credit, but it was funded by a wealthy businessman who was very much interested in these ideas.
It didn't really get into Dunn's level of
wellness. No, it wasn't that kind of wellness. It was more the kind
of. Then there's the Germans, and thanks to you, I had a wonderful time with Lutz and
Lutz Hurdle.
Yeah. And then
he's still going strong and does lovely things. He's out of Dusseldorf. Been there a few times.
He came down when I was over there 2 years ago. He initiated us meeting up at Mark's. What's Mark's last name? Schmidt?
Mark. Yeah, Mark. He's a psychiatrist, medical doctor.
Yeah, and his lovely wife.
Yes.
Oh, we stayed at their home, and
so did I.
Yes. It was fantastic.
Right.
And then there's Jim Anderson.
Yes.
And I met him once at the conference, and we've been in correspondence because he wrote up that history of wellness early on and published it. Any other Europeans that you know of?
I'm sure there are a lot of Europeans. I'll think of some after this is over, unfortunately. But
yeah. Then the Japanese Wellness Association.
Yeah, Japanese wellness people. Yeah, in fact, I'm still connected with them. I went over there for a week in Kyoto, the Japanese Wellness Association. That was great fun.
What year was that?
That was relatively recently, like in the mid-90s.
Oh, okay. Because I negotiated with them for 5 years. And they invited me over in '88 for a week in Japan. Forgotten the name of the wealthy guy that had the chain food stores that funded it.
What kind of stores?
Health food stores.
Health food, yes.
Yeah, all over the world.
The one who funded mine was in the beauty business. He made beauty products.
Yeah, I think they had some of that too. I don't know if it was the same outfit, but that was magical. I had never been treated like royalty before, and
they kept me moving constantly, going to historic sites and gardens, and it was amazing. Great trip.
They translated the wellness workbook into Japanese, and of course I had no idea what it really said.
Right.
And they had this big conference with these, I guess they were people from their organization, and they were doing this, jumping up and down and singing and.
Yeah.
Before we came on stage, it was me and a German nutritionist they brought in. I've forgotten his name. We were sort of like visiting firemen to pump up their company annual meeting. But
well, I was asked to lead them in a sing-along, and the sing-along was "You Are My Sunshine" in English.
How'd that go?
They knew all the words, and it was great fun.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
the Japanese know how to host you.
In Dusseldorf, the song we all sang was, West Virginia. What's that song?
Oh, Take Me Home.
Take Me Home to West Virginia.
Mountain Mamas.
Yeah.
Shall we burst into song here to end this?
There's two people we haven't mentioned. Of course, the longer we say, we'll keep coming up with new names that we think are worthy. But these two definitely deserve mention. Although only the father was there at the beginning.
Judd,
of course,
and Robert. Yeah.
Bob Allen.
Yeah, we didn't get back to him. Yeah.
And Judd has continued his work, and
Right.
expanded upon it considerably.
Yeah, I'll interview him like this as well.
Good.
Memories
Yeah.
of his father. And
Bob will give you a good interview. Judd will give you a good interview.
yeah, yeah, that's for sure.
Well, I think we should spend at least a minute or two on what we're doing now and how that might differ from how that does differ from how we started out.
Exactly, and how it differs from the conventional wellness.
Yeah, from what was innovative wellness then to what we think is innovative now. You want to go first?
No, you're the main subject of the interview. I'll throw in a few words at the end because mine really went off into infant wellness.
For the last 10 or 15 years, I've been, due to frustrations with the way wellness has been torn apart and given all kinds of meanings that I don't recognize, I've tried to promote a consistent message of what wellness is and therefore what principles would apply to it and how do we both best live in such a manner. And with a little help from my friend here, namely my wife Carol, I came up with the idea, or the acronym REAL, to represent the 4 dimensions of wellness that I emphasize. And that would be reason, exuberance, athleticism, and liberty. That's the real wellness concept, which I've even taken the trouble to trademark in hopes of being able to discourage people from misusing it. Everyone's welcome to use it, but I don't want it to stand for marijuana or something of that. And don't laugh. Right now there is a company run by Ricky Williams, who's a former Heisman Trophy winner and star pro football player, who has a company called Real Wellness, and they sell cannabis.
Oh, really?
I have nothing against cannabis. I mean, I don't use it myself, but yeah, I'm big on personal freedoms. If you want to go for it.
Well, if you've trademarked it, how can you do that?
Well, I'm too busy right now to pursue the matter, but
Could be some passive income there, Don, as a board member.
We'll see. I don't want to go all legal on it.
Fringe benefit.
I don't want to give Real Wellness a bad name by making us seem litigious or litigious. Anyway, Real Wellness basically is a program that the reason is critical thinking and science, respecting science, evidence-based thinking. Exuberance is happiness and joy, enjoying your life, meaning and purpose. Athleticism is a combination of exercise and nutrition. And liberty simply is personal freedoms. Organizing your life so you get to live the way you want to without interfering with the rights of others. And that's why I've found Ingersoll so valuable as a person, one who was once a great orator, to look at his speeches and find within all kinds of marvelous insights and expressions of what wellness really can be and should be. So that's the form of wellness I've written about in the latest book I've produced, which you read before it was published, namely Not Dead Yet.
Great title.
World triathlon champions, 75 years of age and over, offer 56 tips for thriving and flourishing in later life. And pretty excited about that, and giving talks about it and using that in the publication that I've been doing since 1984, namely the Ardell Wellness Report.
How many now? What number are you up to?
784 editions, and that doesn't count the 75 editions of the paperback the hard copy versions that I began before 1998, when I switched to electronic. Remember the big eight
Oh yeah,
8 by 14 pages? There were like eight pages of 8 by 14 inch newsletters that I produced once every 3 months. So there were 75 editions of those, and I have one of each of those editions in my library.
Well, you'll get them scanned in. Is there a website that people can go to where you've archived the?
No, that's, you give me an idea though. I could put it at my website, which is simply donardell.com.
Yeah, definitely. You can,
Oh, that's a good idea. Wow. I like that.
yeah, I
All the
think,
tips in the book and all kinds of other information are at that website.
good, that's good. I'm going to have a list of resources in connection with the video for the readers to click on, but we plug them shamelessly here,
Yeah,
and
good.
including links to High Level Wellness, which you can still get on used copies. I noticed there's a number of different entries of it in multiple
Yes.
editions.
Hopefully they're going for hundreds of dollars, right?
None of which we'll see.
Even if they did, we wouldn't see it.
Yeah, my old Wellness for Helping professionals, at one point they were going for $1 and I bought a bunch of them back and now they're up to 40 bucks. So
You usually pay more for the postage than the book.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, well, I feel like we're reaching an end point here, unless we burst into song. But
Maybe we
any
should do
final
that.
words?
Maybe we should do that. I'll give you a little song. Whenever life gets you down, Mrs. Brown, and things hard and tough, and people are stupid, obnoxious, or daft, and you feel like you've had quite enough, just remember that you're standing on a planet that's evolving, revolving at 900 miles an hour, and orbiting at 19 miles a second, so it's reckoned the sun that is the source of all our power. The sun and you and me and all the stars that you can see are moving at 1,000,000 miles a day. Okay, I'll skip the rest. I don't want to keep you here.
I'll put a link to that.
I'll just go to the ending. I'll just go to the ending. So remember when you're feeling rather small and insecure, how amazing and unlikely is your birth. And pray that there's intelligent life somewhere up in space, because there's bugger all down here on Earth.
Oh, that Monty Python piece. I showed it to Yvonne. She'd never seen it. And she howled.
Yeah. Well, on that note, maybe we should conclude.
There's an even weirder note that we could end on, which is Gary Larson.
Oh, yes, yes. You know, I'm the creator of the DBRU equivalence, and I'll explain how that works. It's from a cartoon that shows a bunch of buzzards landing on a deceased critter. And one says to the other, just think, here we are, the afternoon sun beating down upon us, a dead bloated rhino underfoot, and good friends flying in from all over. I tell you, Frank, this is the best of times. So I ask people then, what are your DBRU equivalents? What are your dead bloated rhino underfoot equivalents when you feel just terrific and life is magnificent? Those are precious times and the ultimate reward for living a wellness lifestyle. So I did a double-blind crossover trial, longitudinal horizontal study, and concluded that everybody needs at least 23 DBRU equivalents daily. In order to really enjoy thriving and flourishing with a real wellness lifestyle.
Well,
make sure you get the equivalents. Don't go for the actual dead load.
What better ending could we have? Thank you, Don. It's been a delight. I just hope the recording actually made it.
Be well.
Okay, bye.
Bye.